Xavier McDonald has set 4 of his official visits. Where does Ole Miss and the rest of the SEC schools stand?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into The Portal. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making The Portal podcast your first stop to get all the latest recruiting news, NIL, and transfer portal information. Today's show is going to be about a big-time player from the state of Mississippi, where he's going to take his official visits. And then we're going to kind of go through and look at Ole Miss overall for this spring, what they need to do in recruiting, and a little spring practice talk. And to make that happen, my guy, Stephen Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Stephen, how are you doing today, sir?
Man, I am doing quite well. I'm glad you chose Xavier McDonald in this segment and everything, because he's a Morton kid. And for anybody that's followed Ole Miss football at all, that's where Deuce McAllister's from. That's where Shea Hodge is from. There's been a lot of highly successful people come out of Morton. So I'm pretty fired up. And I think Xavier McDonald has a chance to, he gets overshadowed by Tristen and Jace Matthews and those guys inside the state, but McDonald can really play.
Yeah, I think he's one of the better receivers in the country. He's national top 100 by multiple services, and he's a kid that I've seen live. So before I go into my evaluation of him, just to put it in perspective, don't believe me, don't believe Stephen. The official visits tend to tell just how good a kid is. Stephen, tell me if you think any of this makes any sense to you if he wasn't good. May 30th, Auburn, June 6th, Ole Miss, June 13th, LSU, June 20th, Mississippi State, and he still has pending visit dates that he's going to set, according to Inside the Rebels on 24/7, with Alabama and Florida State. Generally, I would say that's a good sign for his physical traits to play this game we call football. What say you?
Well, honestly, if you're going to tell me, that would probably be the same official visit list that Aiden Williams had, the same official visit that A.J. Brown had. Just if you are a good wide receiver in the state of Mississippi, that pretty much sounds like your official visits.
Yeah, that's the way it looks. So not really surprised by that. And as far as a player, I saw him, and I know you did too, at the Under Armour practices and whatnot down in Orlando. Lean kid, 6'3", give or take. Really changes directions well, even though he reminds me of an old school basketball player, like a two guard, the way he's built, but just long and lanky, and changes directions in and out of his breaks very, very well. And he can high point the football with the best of them. The only thing he doesn't have is weight. He's probably 170 pounds, give or take, soaking wet. He just needs to add weight. But that's okay. You can add it, as I will certainly attest to, much easier than you can lose it. That's a fact. That being stated, kid's super competitive, and he wants to go somewhere that he can play early. So he's not necessarily looking at it from the same perspective of other people with NIL and all that. But, Stephen, what do you think about Mr. Xavier McDonald, and what do you think Ole Miss's chances are to land him?
I was listening to random other podcasts on the On3 and 247. I don't know which one did it, but they were talking about Xavier McDonald, and they had Shea Hodge, the former Morton resident, and he's a current coach at Jackson Academy, and he's a former 1,000-yard receiver at Ole Miss. And he referred to Xavier McDonald in that podcast as saying, hey, this guy is going to be the best player to ever come out of Morton. And whenever you're in the high school that Deuce McAllister played in, that Shea Hodge played in, that is a statement that gets my attention. Now, a lot of that could be Shea Hodge and Mike Espy. They run basically a receiver academy in Jackson, so he knows all of these guys. Like Mike Espy is one of the biggest cheerleaders at Dylan Alford, for instance, because they know all of these receivers and they develop a reputation. But whenever you hear that coming from a Shea Hodge, that kind of makes you pop up a little bit about what exactly Xavier McDonald can be. I think he has a chance to be an explosive wide receiver. Morton plays, I think, at the 3 or 4A level. They're mid-tier as far as high school in the state of Mississippi, which means he is going to absolutely annihilate people on Fridays. So we might not know for sure exactly what we have with an Xavier McDonald prospect until he hits the Mississippi-Alabama All-Star game, if that makes sense.
That All-Star game, by the way, is awesome every year. So that's a great point. I'm curious to see it too, because I highly doubt there are many kids in Mississippi going to handle Xavier one-on-one. He's going to see a lot of shaded safeties to his side. He's going to see linebackers out an extra step or two to his side. And he's flat out going to get bump and run coverage. The next play, they're going to change it. He's never going to see the same thing twice, but there'll be more than one player from somewhere. So it's going to be much harder for him this year, I'm sure. But the other thing with him is you can run a reverse with him. You can put him on special teams, and I'm sure he plays some defense too. So he's one of my favorite players in this class. And your point earlier, I love Tristen Keys. You can make an argument he's the best receiver in the country in this class. Just him alone makes it harder for Xavier. But in most years, he would be the number one receiver in Mississippi. This state, there's 3-4 guys now like that are really, really good at the receiver. It's crazy. Mississippi, they're known for D linemen. They're known for a lot of like runt deuce, guys like that. But the receiver thing is getting pretty impressive out of the Magnolia State. I don't know if it's part of it is just the spread offenses all over in Lane at Mississippi State, the Pirate being there. Like, I think a lot of the schools are adapting, and the athleticism inside the state of Mississippi helps. McDonald's one of the latest. What have you heard about him with the recruiting trail? Who do you think's got the best shot and why?
I think Ole Miss has a really good shot at him. Ole Miss is going to play the game, and he's obviously going to get recruited. But everybody can hear the rumors. I think Ole Miss is well in the game with Tristen Keys, but Ole Miss is never mentioned whenever national people talk about Tristen Keys.
That's right.
That's the same thing that Caleb Cunningham went through a year ago. So we don't really know in March where Ole Miss stands with Tristen Keys. I think they're going to have a good shot. I think they're going to get him to campus. And at the end of the day, I think they have a really good chance to land him. Xavier McDonald, though, is somebody that I think if Ole Miss full court presses him, Ole Miss has a really good shot to land him. Morton is a good area for Ole Miss traditionally in recruiting, and McDonald's a really, really good wide receiver. I think Jace Matthews, he's the other big wide receiver in the state of Mississippi that this year is absolutely nuts. And if Mississippi gets any quarterback play at all, I don't know how Alabama's going to stop them whenever that all-star game happens. All those guys on the field together. I mean, it should be quite interesting. But your point of Mississippi raising up the wide receivers, I think it's the proliferation of 7-on-7 in the state of Mississippi. The quarterback play in Mississippi for decades was really, really bad. Other than Jason Campbell in the decade of like the 2000s, Mississippi didn't really have a quarterback pop at any major institution. So Jason Campbell at Auburn was about it. But now you're starting to see like Deuce Knight. You're starting to see quarterbacks get recruited at a high level and end up in the top 100 level of recruiting. I think that's a testament of 7-on-7 at the quarterback position and them getting better. And then you have the wide receiver academies. I mentioned the Mike Espy and Shea Hodge thing that they do down in Jackson, Mississippi with all the guys. I think because of that, the skill positions are getting better. And everybody that knows anything about football knows that Mississippi had the line on lock to begin with.
Yeah, that's never been an issue. Big fellas, it's harder to find them. But for whatever reason, Mississippi O-line, D-line usually is pretty darn good. And I highly doubt that's going to change anytime soon. So with that, Stephen, one last question about Xavier McDonald. Have you heard anything about his timeline? Is he going to be a kid that makes it this summer, or are we going to carry this bad boy out to National Signing Day?
Now, I could be I saw this somewhere. This isn't mine. And, you're just rooting through trying to peruse stuff. And I'm not sure if it's him or if it's Matthews or if it's Keys, but it's one of the wide receivers in Mississippi. And I think it's McDonald that they wanted to have something before the season potentially.
Okay.
Yeah. Not necessarily going to signing day and not necessarily a June things, but I think he's going to take his visits, take his time, see what it needs to happen. June 6th, listen, as somebody that worked at Ole Miss, around the June 4th weekend was always a big camp, a big senior camp. This feels like it's going to be something similar. I would expect that Xavier is camping up at Ole Miss there. He's going to take his official visit as well, so that feels like a little bit of an extended type situation. we'll see what it looks like. It's just my own conjecture of what's going on and kind of knowing the timeline. But I do think Ole Miss has a really good shot here.
I think that with the way Lane throws the football, I mean, I knew they were going to get an OB, but I'm telling you, Austin Simmons and all that, even if they don't get him in round 1 and he does announce this summer, I think they'll have a chance in round 2 in the fall. That's just my take. To that point, I want to talk to Stephen about spring practice and selling the Ole Miss brand now that it's really went national. That is next here on the Portal, because Ole Miss football has changed a lot. Get the supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Spring practice coming up in a couple of weeks for Ole Miss. And for those of you that are curious about how this works into recruiting, February was a dead period. We just opened back up. And Ole Miss, while they haven't started, if they wanted to host somebody this weekend, they technically could. But spring practice is when kids want to come because they want to see the actual practices. Makes sense. Xavier McDonald is a great case with this. I always say, follow the visits. I know that a lot of people don't know, like Stephen and I do, Austin Simmons. I lived in Florida. I know the kid. I've seen him do all kinds of stuff on a football field. But when you get a chance to see him live and see his arm strength, and he's one of the most intelligent recruits I've ever met. I mean, he graduated high school 2 years early. Like, he tested out everything. If you get kids like that around recruits, whether it's Xavier McDonald, Tristen Keys, or fill in the blank, especially Mississippi kids that have more of a proximity advantage for the Ole Miss Rebels, I think they're going to do well. So again, follow the visits. When, off the top of your head, Stephen, do you know the exact date? Is it a Monday coming up or whatever, like a week and a half from now, something like that? Whenever that is, I guess it doesn't even matter. I would bet you dollar for dollar that within the first 5 practices, over half the in-state kids that they want will be there. Because they're going to, the Saturday, the first scrimmage is always the big one. That's for every school. But there'll be kids that are within an hour, hour and a half, will go there after school. Because spring ball in Mississippi or anywhere else in South, it's not until May. So those kids don't have after school obligations like they do once they're in college. So it's a wide open boat. Explain to people why it's so much fun to see Lane Kiffin's offense with all the receivers and how they can sell that to Tristen Keys, Xavier McDonald, etc.
So the spring practice is the 18th, is the first spring practice for Ole Miss. That's a Tuesday. So a little bit less than 2 weeks from right now, it's going to be there. Ole Miss does things a little bit differently, a little bit outside the box. And the brand for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin is fun. If you go to a practice, if you see them on the game, whenever somebody sees them from afar, they're going to notice that's fun. You see the players and everybody with the fire extinguisher and all of that. Lane Kiffin also does practice really interesting. He runs 2 fields in practice. He has the upperclassman field and the young guy field. So if you are a young player, you are getting coached, you're getting reps, and they have a staff big enough to where they can actually run 2 fields. They have people that can keep an eye on everything that is going on. So you're going to be able to see Austin Simmons and A.J. Maddox running with the top field, running lightning quick plays where they're moving around with the ball all in the air, having a good time, a lot of energy. The music is going to be blaring. They're going to be celebrating, dancing, having a great time on the practice field, and it's just going to look fun. if you are visiting that, especially if you are coming from, let's say, Morton High School or Greene County High School or Hattiesburg High School, up there to where spring practice might be that old style football coach to where they run things a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit of a culture shock. It's like, wait, this is supposed to be college football. This should be more tedious than what I'm going through. This looks a lot fun. This looks like something that I would like to do. And usually that is a nice little gatekeeper to getting Ole Miss into the game with these high school recruits.
Yeah, if you keep them engaged from the outset and it's a little different, teenagers tend to like that in general, not just talking about football, but just in general. I'm curious to see some clips with Austin because, again, I know I keep beating on this drum, but he can really spin it. In their offense under Lane, it's not any kind of secret here. They'll come up with creative ways to get the ball down the field, reverses. It could be a double pass, it could be anything with Lane's offense. And they're just really creative with the route concepts they come up with based on the players they have on that year's roster. He mixes it up. He doesn't just use the same thing over and over again, which I love. And finally, with him, he's just personality. I would not be surprised if somebody committed, just kind of throwing it out there based on conversations with him and the staff at Ole Miss. They do a good job of getting kids on campus because they do that. And now they got an exciting brand that's knocking on the door of the playoff. So I think spring is really important to them. But here's the last part. I mean, you've worked there. You followed Ole Miss your whole life. Explain to people that may have not have been, what is it like on game day at the Grove or just being on campus at Ole Miss for a football weekend?
It's electric. It genuinely is, and it spreads out. Like if you go to a Mississippi State game or an Auburn game or a Tennessee game in some extent, other places where football has the key, the stadium is the center of that Saturday. When you get in the stadium, the football game is the event. At Ole Miss, yes, that's an important event, but there's an equally strong one about 150 yards to the west of it, to where it's just as far as the eye can see, just crammed in tents. Now, if you're claustrophobic, not the place for you. I will tell you that right now. If you don't like being around large groups of people, that is not the place for you. But it is something as far as the electricity and the way that can hold over to the game. And that is something that is starting to emerge at Ole Miss. And when it does, I genuinely think they can next level as a program, they're taking the electricity in the Grove into the stadium. The game day on the field in the stadium atmosphere has really cranked up. That Georgia game a year ago, now it makes sense. Ole Miss beat the heck out of the Georgia Bulldogs. Anybody's going to be fired up when that happens. But the atmosphere during that game was completely next level. And it's because all of that mixed together and what you can move around. Senquez Golson, defensive back that played at Ole Miss, famously said, if you do not want to go to Ole Miss, do not visit. Because the reason is on a game day, when you visit there, there's so many different ways and something for every single recruit to kind of latch onto. It really is a hard deal to see a bad visit by a recruit, even more so than other places in the conference. And I'm really impressed with what Lane has built and how they handle that and everything that's going on. But the Grove's a very special place, and Ole Miss people take very much pride in everything that's going on in that little 9-acre stretch of land.
Well, I think it's something that's on my bucket list. It'll probably get cured this year or next. Just depends on which game I can get to and kind of figure it out. I need to find a way to do a recruiting podcast on it. But like you said, it's crowded there. It's pretty wild. I don't know how I can get a pod in, but I'm trying to figure that out as we speak. So when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about this next season and why I think Ole Miss can be one of the more hot teams on the recruiting trail towards the end of this recruiting cycle. That is next here on the Portal. Stephen, it used to be if you had a great season on the field, it wasn't that recruiting class you were working on, that group of seniors. It was the next one where you saw the biggest benefit, as a rule. But society has changed, obviously, cell phones, the communication ability that we have. It's, I don't want to say instantaneous, but within a couple of weeks, like the Georgia game that you just referenced, Ole Miss received a recruiting bump for that, a portal bump. etc. immediately. This is just my prediction. I picked Ole Miss to make the playoff this next season, and I think they will be one of the more successful programs in the SEC over the next 5 years. I've talked about that on my podcast. I got some pushback because I think they'll be as successful, if not more successful, than Bama, which quite frankly hasn't happened in your lifetime or mine over any stretch. It just hasn't. I mean, it's Bama. I get it. So I think this is going to be the year where they'll go 10-2 or better. Again, I think Austin Simmons will be the surprise player in college football. I'm not a gambler, but if I was, he would be the guy I'd throw $100 on for the Heisman. Like he's got that kind of talent. And Lane, again, it's a cheat code because Lane's calling the plays. Okay. If anybody doesn't know by now that Lane Kiffin understands play calling, then I can't help you. But at the same time, Austin is very, very talented. Just because he hasn't started a game yet doesn't mean he's not a dude. I've seen it with my own eyes, and you can't take that away. It's in my brain. Now, here's the final part. Kids love aerial passing attacks, even if they're defense guys. It's exciting. They're knocking on the college football playoff door. I'm going to predict they're going to get a couple of kids that Bama normally gets, or LSU, et cetera. Not just for in-state kids. They might steal a kid out of Alabama or a kid from Tennessee, whatever. There may be a player that you and I aren't even talking about right now that is really important to them long-term because he visits during spring practice. Kind of back to that point. Always follow the visits. There's going to be one or two kids, a Memphis kid, like what is it, hour and 15 minutes to Memphis from the Ole Miss game. It's not very far. There's going to be a Memphis kid. There's going to be a Dallas kid. There's a few kids you and I were talking about off air from California, a particular high school in Folsom in Northern California in particular, Ryder Lions, maybe. They're going to get somebody because of how they play this season. Again, this is more immediate than it's ever been. 90s, early 2000s, it was a year after. It's transitioned to where I think it's now. I'm predicting that Ole Miss ends up having their best high school class in a very, very long time. Maybe the best one that Kiffin's had. Doesn't hurt to have Tristen in state, Xavier McDonald, and some of those guys either. But it's going to be because they're on-field success. What do you think about my prediction?
I think it's pretty good, but I'm going to say something that's a little bit different than what you're going through. The reason that I think Ole Miss is going to make the run is because Mississippi high school football has gotten so much better than it has been. Yeah,
it is better.
And because of that, it is more competitive with the number of kids in the state of Alabama. And with Lane Kiffin being able to go into the area, Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is well into the game for Landon Duckworth. I'm expecting him to show up at a spring practice at some point.
100%.
And if he commits to Ole Miss, all of a sudden it could snowball in this class. He's one of those guys. He has a certain running back that is reclassified to this class as well. So that's somebody to pay attention to as well. I like what you're saying. I think Ole Miss has a chance to be really good. For instance, this is something not really recruiting, but it's just we talk about Austin Simmons. The players that Ole Miss brought in, the Deshaun Stribling in the transfer portal, Trey Wallace in the transfer portal, Caleb Odom, those guys, whenever you look at the zones that they catch passes in, they are all generally really effective within 10 to 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. And I think that is a cheat code because while Jackson Dart like to attack down the field, Austin Simmons processes the game so quickly, you're going to see more quick passes just because of that. So you need people that can operate in those spaces to be as effective as you want to be. I genuinely think that in the transfer portal this past year, Lane was playing 4D chess.
Yeah, he was looking at it from a perspective of how do I match people on my roster with future guys, not just he's a highly ranked player. That's the difference between good coaching and a team that has a chance to make a run. It comes down to a couple of plays. Think about the playoff game, Arizona State, Texas game, Notre Dame, Penn State game. Like all these games are like one player here or there. That can change based on one guy you bring in. And I think Kiffin's kind of figured out the portal pretty well. I give him a lot of credit because Ole Miss, I had no idea with what they had from their NIL allotment, which isn't the same as like Texas or something like that. It's not. They're so effective, it's not even funny. So it's certainly going to help them. Stephen, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
It's on YouTube at the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We're available wherever you get your podcast. You can also see us on ABC 24, their website in Memphis, and all of the Tegna stations as well. Having a super good time getting ready for March Madness. We're going to start our basketball coverage very quickly. about that. So it should be a lot of fun. You can follow me on Twitter at the Stephen Willis. And we have social media platforms pretty much on all the social medias. And I try to interact with them, but if I can't, I can't. But we'd love to have you.
All right. I appreciate it, sir. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your pods, the Portal Podcast. And I love doing it. We're here every day of the week, just like Stephen is with the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We will see you again soon. Like and subscribe.